Maturity Series 6 Pillars for Smarter Business. I'm Lauren Howells, and once again, I'm thrilled to be your host today. Now, we're just going to give it a few minutes to let everybody join the session, and in the meantime, let me just spend a few moments setting the scene. So as I said, it's the fourth and the final part of our four-part series where we've been exploring what it means to become a truly AI mature organisation. Now, our speakers today are Jo Martin, who's our Consulting Director, and Fiz Yazdi, who's Managing Director of our consulting practice, Sopra Steria Next. And I'm going to hand to Fiz shortly. But just before I do, I'd like to just cover a few quick housekeeping notes. So first of all, this is a one-way webinar, so no one can hear you or see you. Feel free to relax and enjoy the session. But if you have any questions, and we really encourage you to put them to our speakers, please use Slido on the right-hand side of your screen. You can submit questions with your name or anonymously throughout the session, and then I'll pop back at the end to put your questions to our speakers. And finally, if you'd like to turn on closed captions, you can find that option in the left-hand corner of your screen. So that's everything from me for now. Thank you again for joining us. Let's get started. I'm going to hand over now to Fiz. Thank you, Fiz.
Thanks, Lauren. Hello, everyone. And as Lauren said, welcome to the fourth and final session in our AI Maturity series. Over the last few weeks, we've explored what it really takes to adopt AI in a way that delivers genuine and sustainable value. We've asked you to think about where you are today, where you want to be, and how you're going to get there. It's clear to all of us now that AI is everywhere. It's increasingly baked into all the systems we rely on, often by default. And these days, having AI in your strategy isn't optional. There's an expectation that every organization is doing something to further their mission with AI. But the big question is still how. Many organizations, CEOs still aren't sure how to embed AI in a way that really works and delivers results. And there's no time to sit back and wait, because AI isn't like any other technology we've seen before. Just look at the pace. The internet took 7 years to hit 50 million users. Gen AI has flown past 78 million users in just 2 years. And what makes AI even more cutting is how it can boost what we do as humans. It can help us write, analyze, plan, code, solve problems better and faster than ever. And it can be applied to almost anything in any industry. So the message is really simple. You have to be ready for it, not just to test it out, but to build it into how your organization works with your people, for your people, so you can really unlock its potential. So in this series, we've asked you to think about your AI maturity. We've talked about infrastructure, data, and what it means to build really strong, scalable foundations. And today we're focusing on arguably the most important element, people. If digital transformation taught us anything, it's that technology change fails if you don't bring people with you. Without the right culture, skills, and mindset, you won't get adoption, let alone pace. And the truth is, we don't know yet exactly how AI will reshape our jobs, our businesses, or even our world. And anyone that says they know is lying. But what we do know is this: to succeed, we must keep people at the core of this fundamental change. I'm delighted to say we have the perfect person to guide us through this conversation today, Jo Martin. Jo has over a decade of consulting experience helping complex, multinational organizations design and implement better ways of working. She's led both rapid transformations and multi-year global programs, and she's a passionate advocate for human-centered organizations. Today, Jo will help us connect the dots between people, culture, and skills, so we can prepare for the future and maximize the benefits of AI for both business and our people. So with that, Jo, over to you.
Thanks, Fiz. Hi, everybody. Thanks for coming to our session today. So just to recap a little bit on what we've been talking about in previous sessions, our AI maturity framework, we've designed around 6 pillars and 9 principles that you can see on screen there. These have been covered quite extensively in earlier webinars, so I'm not going to go into them in detail. Today, I'm going to cover the last two, which are expertise and culture. So why does it matter? Why do we care about this? So Fiz has outlined the challenge, right? We can't ignore AI. We can't assume it's going to work alongside the organisation as it stands either. We need to integrate it into the fabric of how we think about and get work done. So if we look at some numbers to try and bring some clarity to the situation, these are all recent large surveys that have been undertaken by the likes of McKinsey, BCG, Accenture, and Gartner. And we can see from this that most companies and employees are using AI in some form, and this number is growing all the time, which is probably related to the feeling of we need to do something with AI. We can't just stand still. But both Gartner and Accenture found that leaders are concerned about escalating costs, unclear value, and inadequate risk controls. You can see from these numbers that a whopping 90% are concerned about security readiness, which is quite concerning. And staff are feeling very poorly supported as well. Over 2/3 felt that they didn't have the right tools or training. And we hear constantly about the fear around AI in the future of work. Some of it's definitely grounded in reality, and some of it's coming from the hype that's been built up around AI over the past few years. And we'll talk more about that later. What you'll notice with this research and most of the research and thinking that comes out around AI is it's a bit contradictory. There's a disconnect between the intention and our capability and the reality of how we're experiencing the working life. We can see that in the results that we've looked at. So what's actually going on here? Well, in simple terms, what we're seeing is the hype-driven rapid change of AI colliding with our traditional management systems. We were always taught in business school, and we're very used to, an organisation has a particular structure, it has processes, it has governance, but that's now all being challenged by AI. And what's happening just now is that shareholders and organisational leaders are willing to invest because they feel that they should, but only up to a point, only until cost and risk controls or the culture tells them that they should stop and pause and reflect. And someone asked in an earlier webinar, how do we keep up? And I was reflecting on that. It's a great question. And what a lot of us feel when we try to educate ourselves, at times it just feels too overwhelming, even for those of us who are right inside this change. And how do you know you're focused on the right things? Well, I'm not a technology expert, so I'm not going to speak for how you keep up to date with the technology. But I would say when you're thinking about culture and organisational design, it's not a bad idea to go back to first principles. A lot of what works in the AI space is actually just good practice when you're trying to stand up innovation and work through strategic management. What is it that you can do in your context that will move your organisation forward or your team forward? So if you like, what's the problem you're trying to solve or the opportunity that you're trying to leverage? And then you can be really purposeful about how you achieve that through your structure and capabilities that you put in place. That approach is no different to delivering any other strategy. However, traditional approaches have been suboptimal for a long time because they're designed for task management and control. They're designed for those traditional management systems that we're talked about and we've experienced for a long time. We've largely got away with this in the age of digital transformation because we could paper over the cracks, but AI can't adjust in the same way that people can. So it's amplifying the challenges, and that's why it demands a different approach. Retrofitting isn't going to work in this context. And to bring this to life a little bit, I want to share with you what we're seeing with some other organisations that are considered pioneers in this space. So you should all be familiar with Moderna. They created one of the COVID vaccines. And the reason that they were able to produce an effective vaccine so quickly, which nobody expected, was because they were already an algorithm-driven company. And what I mean by that is they had a single set of data that both people and AI could access and work with. And then teams were brought together from various functions across the organisation dynamically to solve for the particular use case. How do we create a COVID vaccine? So they didn't have the handoffs between departments that hamper so many organisations. They had a team that were all working on the same thing. And that's just good collaboration practice, that everybody's working towards a common goal. What's noteworthy here, and we can point back to some of the advice from the previous sessions, is that they knew what the use case was. We've said, you need to understand your problem, you need to understand why you're thinking about using AI. So they knew what that was. They had usable data all in one place. Susanna, my colleague, talked at length about this last week. And people weren't constrained by organisational boundaries. And we're going to talk about that in this session. So when Moderna was faced with the vaccine challenge, they were able to quickly evaluate all those possible solutions. And not only did AI contribute to the speed of this, but they didn't have to navigate the politics of power and decision ownership to get their team all pulling in the same direction, because their operating model was already set up that way. You're probably thinking, Jo, I can't rebuild my business, right? And you'd be quite right. It's expensive and it's not always the best thing to do. But you actually don't need to. You also can't treat AI as a side project that's going to integrate back into the business seamlessly. So we've got to find a middle ground. And hopefully we're going to do that through this session. So when we look at how to build AI into an organisation, we need to remember that no initiative is going to survive unless both the culture and the operating model support the disruption that's needed to realise those exponential gains that everybody keeps telling us are possible. You can have the best technology in the world, but if your environment isn't supportive and that's made up of your culture and how you get work done, the technology is useless. So today, what we're going to do is a bit of a deep dive into these areas to close out our series. I'm going to start with culture because culture should inform and shape your strategy. And then we'll move on to the operating model and capabilities, covering what kind of structure, expertise, and cross-functional working you need to make AI successful. And trust is critical in all changes, but especially with AI, where we're not really sure about the broader societal outcomes, and that's contributing to a lot of the fear around what's coming next. It's a measure of how safe people feel, which impacts adoption. And we build trust through believing that we can do what we're being asked to do without negatively impacting us or the people we care about. But we also need to see that proven through actions. So we need to go beyond words, we need to go beyond diagrams and platitudes. We need to change our behaviours to support this. All of these points are covered in our AI maturity assessment. So while I'm talking, I think it would be good if you have a think about where your organisation fits. And then at the end of the session, Lauren will share with you a link to our maturity assessment, and you can go and have a look and get a customised report that will help move you forward from where you are today. It's really good. It's got really practical advice. I do recommend that you do that as a first step. So as I said, we're going to start with culture, because no amount of funding, tools or expertise is going to compensate for a culture that rejects your strategy. Culture is the invisible architecture that shapes how work gets done in an organisation. It's the lived experience of the people who are in and around the organisation. And it's a set of spoken and unspoken rules that determine what's really possible rather than what your ambition is. When it's left unchecked, culture reinforces the status quo. But when you design intentionally what your culture is and how it supports where you want to be, it becomes a really powerful lever for change. So culture isn't an abstract concept, even though it feels a bit difficult to grasp, and it's not something that can easily be changed either. You can think of it as a product of shareholders and investors, leaders and employees, and customers. For some organisations, that would include the media and public opinion as well, right? So all of these individuals and groups are attracted to the company by a shared purpose and the belief in how the purpose is brought to life and delivery. And that's really important, because if how you operate as an organisation deviates too much from that set of core beliefs and principles, then what we see is lots of companies, some of them are high profile, who've actually had to abandon their strategy because of customer and shareholder pushback, because what they were trying to do didn't align with how people thought of the company's purpose and values. Equally though, I've worked with plenty of companies that have achieved very ambitious and some might say impossible strategies purely because everyone was working from a shared belief. So don't underestimate the importance of culture when you're thinking about what your strategy might be. So we look at culture through two lenses predominantly, and you can see that on the screen here. Across the bottom, we've got employee identity, and up the side, we've got investor, or indeed you can choose leadership appetite for change. And that change is the one that you're particularly thinking about in the context. If any one of these is misaligned with the strategy, so say your strategy was we're going to become a completely AI-driven company, but your employees were worried about that, they fundamentally didn't believe in it, or your investors thought that that was a really bad investment and they weren't going to get a return on it. Even if that strategy is deemed to be the right strategy, you're going to have to decide how to proceed. So you can see here in the matrix, if investors are keen but employees are misaligned, then you can rebuild the culture internally. And this usually involves a level of turnover, some replacement of particular roles, maybe a restructure, as well as, resetting your values and thinking about training for your staff. It's difficult, it's slow, and it's expensive, and it's definitely, if you're thinking of going down that path, I would say think very carefully about whether you can iterate on that journey. Investors are misaligned, but employees are keen. Then the best thing to do is to actually ring fence that group of employees that are keen, protect them from the market and from criticism, and get them to work on something small and safe so that they can prove their value, and then bring that back into the core business, or indeed spin it off into a separate business. If neither your investors nor your employees are aligned, then as I said, your strategy might be the right strategy, but it actually hasn't got any backing, and it will be shot down. And you can't underestimate the ability of human beings to circumvent a good strategy if they don't believe in it. So at this point, we would say you should probably reconsider what you're trying to do in your context. And then where both investors and employees are aligned, it's safe to make that change. But don't just roll out technology without making sure the organisation is ready to receive the outcomes. So when we talk about transforming the core, there is still some work to do here. So what does it mean that an organisation is ready for AI? So when we ask if it's ready, what we're really saying is there room for ambiguity and iteration? Or are people being rewarded for control and certainty? And some tests that you can apply to check if your culture is aligned is really big question. Can your teams run high risk, high reward experiments across different functions without that fear of failure, blame, or damage to their future job prospects? So what's the level of safety that they have in that environment? Is it safe to stop work if something's just not working? You see that there's sometimes, some bias that comes from, well, we've already invested a certain amount of money, so we need to carry on, or we've already approved the business case up front, so we need to deliver that. And then there comes more pressure and people find it hard to operate in that environment. And the third one there, can people speak up and still be heard? even if the answer is that they don't know what to do next. And this is really important because in some organizations, you find a culture of just get it done. I don't want to hear that you can't do it, right? It's not helpful in this context. So what we're talking about in the context of an AI organization is cultural maturity, which means that your shareholders and investors are aligned with a purpose that's greater than short-term ROI. So they're not looking for a return on their investment in the next 6 to 12 months, say, for example, but they're willing to stay the course through that period of uncertainty, and they believe that they will get that return on investment over the mid to long term. You've got leaders who, rather than directing their team on exactly what to do and when, they set direction, they're curious, and they remove blockers for the team to be able to do what they need to do. Your employees feel empowered through AI. They're not concerned about AI. They actually find it quite inspiring. And this comes from them feeling ownership over what the problems the AI has been applied to and how it's actually deployed into their area of the organization. And then finally, you've got customers who have trust on how AI is being applied to their data, and they can see that the brand values remain intact. So AI is an amplifier of culture. If the culture rewards certainty, siloed ownership, and heroics, you get very fragile siloed AI projects. They'll remain in pilot phase and they won't go anywhere because they won't be able to integrate into the organization. But if your culture rewards learning, transparency, and shared progress across the whole organization, you'll get that entrepreneurial feeling and you'll start to get sustainable adoption of your AI pilots and scaling of them into the organization. So your AI-ready culture looks like knowledge being openly shared, so it's not kept to just a few people that need to know. There are no unicorns. Nobody will say, oh, you know, Bob from finance is the only person that can do this, because Bob from finance is part of a team now and he shared his expertise. You'll see power to make decisions is spread across those teams, so it speeds up the time to make decisions, which is really important when you're trying to work with AI and experimenting and seeing what works and what doesn't work. And there's no one single person or group that holds the keys to that change. So you don't find that there's somebody who's saying, no, you can't do that because that's my area and I'm going to protect it to the death, right? And then finally, your learning cycles are quite short. And what that means is that your pilots are being operationalized frequently back into the organization, and you can learn from them in a real life setting. So I would say as a starting point, if you didn't do anything else, definitely these are the areas that you should focus on strengthening as you go on this journey. So next, we're going to talk about operating models. So everything I've just said needs to be brought to life in an operating model and how the organization works, right? If we don't do that, then the AI efforts fall apart because they've got no structure, they've got no scaffolding round about them. So the operating model is about how decisions are made, how funding flows, how people are organized to deliver outcomes. It tells us who does what with whom and how to deliver the strategy. But it's not just a document. And lots of people make the mistake that an operating model is organizational charts and processes. But actually, it's a full set of operating rules. So everybody inherently understands this is how we do things here. If the operating model doesn't support how your AI needs to work, then even the best technology won't land well. So pilots and proofs of concept will stall and remain siloed from the business with nowhere to go. Why does that matter? Well, AI isn't like buying a tried and tested enterprise system. You can't just roll it out and expect it to work. If the people who are expected to adopt a solution weren't involved in building it in the first place, they're unlikely to welcome it. And especially in the case of AI, because the technology is unfamiliar, There's a lot of negative hype round about AI, and it feels like a bit of a black box to people. They don't really know how it works and what happens when the data goes in, and can I trust what's coming back out of it, right? So the first thing we would say is definitely people need to be involved at every stage. If the systems that it needs to connect to are stuck inside siloed areas of your business, so if they can't speak to each other because of those organisational boundaries, then your AI solution can't scale across the organisation. It stays contained in its area. And if the governance and funding mechanisms are too slow and rigid, then your AI solution won't be able to develop and scale fast enough to show value before the plug's pulled. So back to what I was saying earlier, it's okay to invest to a point until you decide that the change isn't happening fast enough, right? So if the operating model isn't ready, AI can't deliver. And we're seeing this everywhere. Legacy management models which reward control and hierarchy are not what your AI project needs. AI needs flow, it needs direct integration into the organisation, and you need to be able to iterate on your solutions constantly. So that creates quite a lot of tension in that traditional management model. One of the biggest challenges from an organisational perspective is that AI touches everything, but nobody really owns it. It's not just an IT concern, it's not just a people concern, it's both. And that means the operating model needs to be redefined for shared ownership. Leading companies are already adapting. Moderna, who we spoke about earlier, I was reading last week, had merged their HR and IT functions at the executive level. And that's in recognition that we're moving into a world where human capability and technical capability have to move together. IT is becoming about AI, and that's clashing with our people processes. And many successful companies, whilst they're not doing this particular level of change, Moderna is the first one to do that, are building cross-functional labs and model offices. They're pulling operations, risk, product and data science experts in from the start. And then they're also letting real-world users shape the solutions so everybody's bought in and understands what's happening. So here's what a more AI-ready operating model actually looks like. We've got those dedicated cross-functional teams. They're co-developing solutions, so the users are in the room from the start. We don't just hand them a finished product and say, go test that and tell me if it works. With model offices, pilots aren't built in isolation. They're tested in a live setting with real data, and you get immediate feedback loops. Now, you do that once you've proven your model, not while you're proving your model, just to be clear on that live data setting. Funding's released incrementally, so it's based on delivery outcomes, not on the upfront business case. So you don't get this big chunk of funding, you get little bits of funding depending on how you're progressing. And then governance needs to be transparent, it needs to be cross-functional, it needs to not be buried in those separate silos. And at Sopra Steria, we've put this into practice internally as well. So earlier on, we recognised, everybody was using IT, there was lots of shadow AI initiatives happening, and that was all outside of formal oversight, and obviously that's a big risk. But we didn't want to demotivate people and stop them doing what they were doing. So we needed to ensure that we'd set something up, that we'd check that AI was being used responsibly, but without putting too much overhead on what people were doing. And what we have is a lightweight strategic AI governance board, and that involves people from ethics, legal, risk, technology, and every single project that we do that involves AI, whether it's for us, whether it's for our customers, flows through that board. So it's part of our usual governance process, and it ensures we're being responsible without hampering innovation. And it's absolutely brilliant because not only does it have a complete view of everything that's happening and helps speed up decision making around which projects we work on and which we don't, but as an unintended consequence of that, we have a group of people that can see everything, so they can join the dots between initiatives and help us to be more innovative and more collaborative. It's become our AI anchor. And on to the workforce. AI, as we all know, is changing the shape of the workforce. We feel this every day, right? And we see it in the press every day. We're moving into a world where work is done by humans, machines, or increasingly both. This is what we mean by a hybrid workforce, where you've got humans and machines working together side by side. And let's be honest about job displacement, because it would be irresponsible not to. There's already been massive job displacement, and I expect that will continue for quite some time. But what we also need to remember is that these are cycles that enterprise goes through, and everything will balance out over time and we'll reach an equilibrium of what's next. So our job in this situation isn't to resist that change. That change is inevitable. It's happening today. It will happen whether we like it or not. Our job is to understand what's happening and prepare for it. So we need to educate ourselves about the landscape. We need to upskill, reskill, reassign, and reframe work so that our people can thrive alongside the technology. And that means thinking about how we define jobs, decision rights and workflows, how they work across agents and people in the organisation. What's needed from an organisational perspective, and this is something to think about when you're looking at your operating model and how you fold AI into the business, is what are the work domains that you've got? So where is work routine, and that can be automated, and that sits on the left-hand side of this little diagram I've got here. And then where is it more complex, creative, or requires empathy? So it actually needs a human touch. So there are cases where AI could do the job, but they can't give the level of empathy that's needed. So have a think about that and map that out. Secondly, if you then look at those hybrid roles where you've got people working alongside AI, which are the ones where people will supervise algorithms and escalate the edge cases and help to tune the AI? And then which are the ones where AI is being used by humans to uncover insights and make better decisions faster? If you map that out, you'll get quite a good idea of how to apply AI. And then finally, when we're thinking about job design and we're thinking about what it means to be a leader in the world of AI, we need to understand that AI isn't just replacing inexperienced roles. It's shifting what every single role looks like, including how we build and manage teams. And leaders need to understand and upskill themselves in how to line manage a hybrid workforce. So if we move on to capability, to operate in a world of AI-enabled cross-functional teams, we've got 5 core enablers that we think really matter. Essentially, people need to understand what they're trying to achieve together, so it's not just what their individual job is anymore, it's what the group job is, and that group includes your AI agents as well. It means shifting how we define success from those functional KPIs to shared outcomes. I'm going through a project at the moment where we're doing this for a team, and that flip in thinking from individual success to shared outcomes is really difficult for people to grasp. So spend some real time on this, helping people through that change. It's difficult for people to move from individual to shared performance. Once you've got that sorted, you can start to build those teams that work well across boundaries. It doesn't mean everybody has to be an expert in everything, but people do need to have enough of a handle on what other people's roles are in the wider context so that they can contribute meaningfully and the whole team can adapt together and learn and grow and bring that learning back into what they're trying to achieve. On top of that, outside of those specific AI teams, you need to lift the whole organisation's understanding of AI. So we talked earlier about if people don't know what's happening and they don't trust what's happening, then they will reject AI when it comes to their area. So the objective here isn't to make everybody an AI expert. It's to make sure they know enough to engage meaningfully with what's happening and they've got that trust in the process. And that trust is built over time in context. So it's not enough just to say, this is what AI is and this is how it impacts you. You have to feel it. You have to be part of the experimentation. And that's why things like peer learning and shadowing and communities of practice have become really essential in the organisation. They're not nice to have anymore. And that's how we build the capability, right? We have these shared groups experimenting, understanding, learning together. But the last thing here, which is super important, is not to put all the expectation on the core team to do the heavy lifting, to do all of the change management activity too. Find and support the people who fundamentally understand what AI is and what it can do for the organisation. Those are the people who can bridge the gap between business and technology in your organisation. And those are the people who are best placed to coach and champion change across the whole organisation. If you're thinking about capability build, it's really tempting to think about, I need to go and hire all the AI experts and I need data scientists and, you know, I need all these things that I'm being told I need. But actually, a lot of the capability build can be supported through a mix of hiring, training, partnering, and just experimenting. You learn so much through experimenting. And no one answer is a complete solution. So your capability strategy does now need to consider all four of those. This is about developing existing people in the role that they're in a way that supports them to understand how they can contribute in the new shape of work. So let's bring it all together. Just to summarise what we've talked about 3 key enablers for sustainable AI adoption from a people and organisation perspective. The culture needs to support learning and risk-taking. The operating model needs to be able to make that real through changing how work and decisions and teams are structured. And your capability strategy needs to equip people to thrive, to trust that they know what to do and that they're safe in this environment. And we see that without these, even the best technology stalls because AI demands a different approach. It's actually a whole organisation transformation that requires a great deal of trust and human integration. It's not a straightforward technology deployment. Thank you. Back to you, Lauren.
Thanks so much, Jo. Lots and lots to think about there. So yeah, as Jo mentioned earlier, we really encourage you to take our AI maturity assessment. So it takes less than 10 minutes and you'll receive your AI maturity score, but also get some really rich advice on how you can push your AI journey forward. So a link to the AI maturity assessment can be found in Slido on the right-hand side of your screen, and we'll also email this over to everyone afterwards. Now, we've had a couple of really good questions come through. Thanks to everyone who's submitted something so far. But yes, just a quick reminder that if there's something you'd like to ask, it's not too late. You can pop your question in Slido on the right-hand side of your screen now. So let's dive into a few of the questions, Jo. So first of all, if we're not ready to change our operating model yet, what's a good first step?
Ooh, good question. So yeah, I mean, changing your operating model is very difficult and time consuming, right? So what I would say is identify an area or a use case that's safe to fail if you haven't started a journey with AI. So you can ring fence a small team, you can bring people together from different areas and give them a problem to solve using AI and then support them with the data and decision-making authority. And most importantly, a leader that will sort of help them to clear blockers and keep them away from criticism. And then that needs to work outside the normal organisational constraints. So that team that's ring-fenced and is experimenting can then share their learnings, and that can be brought back into the operating model. So you don't necessarily have to define up front what the operating model looks like. You can evolve it over time. It just takes longer that way, but it's one of the options if you're not ready.
Great, thank you. Thanks, Jo. A question from Lucy. What's the best way to engage teams when they're worried about job losses?
Yeah, I think number one, be honest. It's good practice, right? And we've talked about that a lot, that the best practice actually still applies in the world of AI. So acknowledge the fear, acknowledge that change is happening, and that's valid, right? That's a valid feeling to have. I think it's important more than in any other time not to be vague and share what you know and what you don't know and what you're trying to find out. And then define what the future looks like for staff, right? So if that means job losses, be really clear about that. If that means that people need to retrain or they need to move into different roles, be super clear about that. And then finally, I would say, involve staff in that process. Don't go and lock yourself away in a room and try and come up with the answer, but involve people in that process, because that builds trust and they have an opportunity to contribute ideas.
Super, thank you. So I think we've just got one more question, but if you do have any final questions that you'd like to pose, please pop them in Slido now. But it looks like this is the last one for the time being. So someone said, this was really useful, thank you. How would you suggest we raise AI literacy without overwhelming people?
Yeah, so everybody doesn't need to know everything about AI. Everybody doesn't need to be an expert, but there is a foundational level of knowledge that's needed. And what we found here, we took all of our staff through that foundational learning around AI a couple of years ago now. And what we found was that it was a mixture of how it works, and what it does for the business and where the benefits are of AI. So I think there is a little bit of, technically, how does it work so that people understand what you can get from AI, as well as what does that mean for the business? How is it being used? What does this mean for the future of the organisation? I think there's also an element of mixing up what that training looks like. So a mix of kind of short sessions where you're sharing information, experimentation or role playing around AI, some demos of what people are doing and how they're using it. One of the things that's worked really well for us is just people sharing on all hands calls. Oh, I did this with AI and I was able to achieve these results, right? And here's how you can do it too. And then I think, when you've got that baseline level, you can then start laying in that deeper learning around things that are particular to those individuals' roles.
Fabulous. And we've actually had a couple more questions while you were speaking there, Jo. So I'll just move on to those now. So Sam has asked, what skills should leaders be focused on building right now?
Oh, a massive dose of empathy, I would say. It's a difficult time for everybody, right? So people first, although I'm a little bit biased, so I would say that, right? I think one of the other things that leaders definitely need to be able to do is cut through the noise and understand what's hype and what's real, so that they can help people to make sense of that. And then the other really important skill that leaders need to have in this new world is facilitation, because as we spoke about, leaders can't be directing through tasks anymore. They need to be sharing, this is the direction we're going in, these are the problems we're trying to solve. This is what we need you to do to be able to unlock insight and make decisions fast, because the world's changing really quickly, right? I would say that AI is a great way to expose your leadership weaknesses. So focus on those kind of core people skills, and we won't go too far wrong.
Super. And then Claire has a final question as well. So she's asked, have you a specific resource you would recommend for learning about AI?
Yeah, that's an amazing question. How do I learn about AI? Gosh, what a great question. Not a specific resource. I think it's about thinking about what makes particular sense in your setting, right? So for me, I'm super interested at the moment in agentic AI, and there's lots of kind of influential people in the world of business who are also very interested in agentic AI, and they're exploring those areas. So I actually used generative AI. I used ChatGPT and said, give me a list of all the people that I should follow if I'm interested in these things. And so for me, it's about the practice of every single day going and finding out what's been said in that particular area that I'm interested in. As a general resource, yeah, that's a tough one, because you need to cut through the hype and get to the heart of the matter. Fiz, do you have any views on this? We built our own, didn't we?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't build. I think that advice is great, Jo. There's no one specific thing, but I think you've just got to tailor your learning, haven't you? And dip in quickly and get out quickly if it's not suited to you, because there's so much. Lauren, I wonder if I've got time just to offer a couple of builds on some of the questions that we've had.
Absolutely, Fiz, go for it.
Jo, I mean, I think you've given such sound and sensible advice, and I wanted to go back to that question around, what's the best way to engage teams when they're worried about job losses? And I thought you gave a really good guidance there about being honest. I've got a recent example actually of working with a HR director of a large, many thousand person organization, and we were having exactly this conversation. And I think part of the difficulty is sometimes people know where they are now, and they know there is a future. They're not entirely sure what that future might be, because we're all not quite sure where this is going to go yet. And one of the things that he said that I really liked was, number one, prepare people for change, as you said. If you can't be absolutely clear about what the future is, at least state what you are committed to. We are here to use AI for the good. We want to make sure that where we can, we will upskill and retrain our workforce. So sometimes you can't exactly paint the future, but there will be commitments that you can make based on what you know. And I thought that was really good advice. The second thing he said again was around that commitment to reskilling and upskilling. You know what your workforce is made of, and you alluded to it in your talk. Some people may be processing at the junior, processing data at a junior level. In the future, they might be audit and checking, but you can start to lay those foundations now. And I thought what was really interesting about what he said was, that's not just because we want to maintain keep the great talent that we've got. It's also because we feel incumbent to do what's right from a societal point of view as well. So we need to be, helping people learn the skills that they're going to need to exist and thrive in an AI-enabled workforce wherever they end up. That's going to be good for the UK economy, etc. Third thing he said was communicate successes. So where people, in a lot of organisations we're working on, as the other question alluded to, there's not deep operating model change. It's difficult to do that. But there is this lovely kind of bite-sized transformation going on. And you talked quite a bit about making sure you choose the right use cases. It's not just do something, it's do a high value thing really well in a bite-sized way, and then communicate and share about the success that you're having it. So You know, we've been to demos recently from our own organisation, I know, where we've had an agentic bot for a central government client around payroll. And actually, we heard a live demo from a call of somebody calling up, asking for an adjustment to their working hours, asking to change their bank details. And it went so smoothly. It was really impressive. But then actually, the caller started to allude to the fact that the reason they were having to ask for these adjustments was because they were experiencing financial difficulty. And actually then the bot handed off in a really empathetic, decent way to a person. You know, so actually showcasing that kind of thing, because none of us want to be sat on call centre lines forever going round in circles. We want some of this AI enabled efficiency to come our way. It's better user experience for us as users, as people. But we do want to know that there are things it won't try and tackle. And I loved that demonstration. I thought it did more for us as a company to go, come on, let's embrace this change. All of the being told, you know, it is a real show success. Don't tell.
Thank you.
Thanks, Fizz.
Thanks so much, Fizz. I've immediately written down bite-sized transformation, as I love that phrase. It's my new favourite phrase. So thank you so much, Fizz. Thank you, Joe. Thank you to everybody who's joined us today and for the rest of the series as well. Thank you for so many questions that we've seen. It's really been wonderful. So this was the final instalment in our AI Maturity series, and all of the sessions will shortly be available on YouTube, so you can catch up with a session that you might have missed, or indeed send it on to colleagues as well. So we'll email the link to all of the recordings and the assessment over the next day or two. And we'd love to hear from you with any feedback about this series, and indeed what you'd like to see from us next. We look forward to hearing from you all. So thanks again for joining us.